March 27th meeting of the Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee meeting. If we call the meeting to order, I think, well, I've got waiting for Lee to get here, and Lee's here, okay. Ishwar is excused for the afternoon. He had just gotten back from Zurich or someplace and gave that presentation to us, and so we gave him a pass and said, yeah, we don't want you falling over during the meeting. But a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, is everybody on the TAC? You've all met Ann Johnson over there. Ann, wave. Ann, as you know, is your point of contact for travel and those kind of things. Our meeting in April is going to be in Monterey at the Monterey Hyatt. And so to the extent that you need to work through things, Ann will help you out. So why don't we move... and one other item, housekeeping. Norma Ortega gave these to me. We'll pass these out. This is a brochure that the Caltrans staff put together. I believe Julie's communication team has seen this, and I don't know if they've signed off on it or what have you. But I'm going to pass these around. This is some good information on Road Charge. Basically, as it says, exploring an option for replacing California's gas tax. So why don't I pass a few of these around, and folks can take a look at those. As we move down in this process, I know more and more materials will be developed from an educational standpoint. So our next item on the agenda is, I'm going to give it to Carrie to kind of introduce Shannon. But this is, now we're going to get into where the rubber meets the road for the afternoon part of the meeting, and we do have some decisions to make today. So with that, let me turn it over to Carrie.
Thank you, Chair. Committee members, Shannon Crum will be providing an overview of policy decisions the TAC will be considering today. Shannon will be teeing up the policy discussion, which will be followed by a more in-depth presentations and discussion by the TAC. And at the conclusion of items 10, 11, and 12, we will be asking the TAC to take action on some high-level policy issues, which will be presented in agenda item 13. So with that, I'll give you Shannon.
Okay, thank you very much. Mic is on now. I'm happy to be back. I just wanted to, before I launch into this, thank the TAC for your attention, thank Caltrans for all of their input and assistance over the last month in preparing these materials for you, and thank the CTC staff wholeheartedly for the feedback and the editorial comments and all of their help in making sure that we're staying on target. We want to ensure that as we move through this process, we're providing the information that you need, and they're helping make sure that we do that. So thank you, Carrie. I know a lot of times when we talk, we're so busy with trying to get the work done, we don't bother to stop to say that. So, and thank you, Norma. So we're going to dive in. We have three kind of high-level questions that we want to address this afternoon before we adjourn. The first, we've already seen these this morning in the list of questions, asks whether automated distance recording and reporting should be offered in addition to the various manual methods that might be considered. The manual options would include things like a time-based permit or a mileage-based permit, where you might go and purchase the ability to drive an unlimited number of miles for some period of time, or purchase the ability to drive some stated number of miles over whatever time that took, or periodic odometer inspections or odometer reporting. Automated options would include things like electronically reporting mileage that you had traveled using in-vehicle devices, location-based services that use GPS to differentiate between in-state travel and out-of-state travel or private road travel, and there's a whole slew of options in between. This afternoon, Matthew Dorfman is going to walk you through a number of operational scenarios and a number of technology options to get to both these manual options and these automated options. Before he does that, though, I wanted to lay a little bit of groundwork, and I don't want to throw a whole bunch of statistics at you, but you are going to get about 6 numbers, things just to keep in mind and think about while he's talking. Aside from the privacy concerns that some people have, particularly with the GPS option, there are some access things to consider. Some of the options that Matthew will be talking about, he talks about using a smartphone to facilitate reporting, and that is a great technology. I absolutely think it's a lot of fun. It's effective, it's inexpensive for the state because the user bears the cost of having that smartphone. Only about 60% of people in California have smartphones, though, and so that leaves 40% who need a different option. Doesn't have to be a manual option, but it needs to be a different option. Another thing to consider as far as the access goes is that the differences in smartphone ownership do vary significantly by race and ethnicity. Maybe not in the way you would expect. Ownership is actually higher among Hispanic populations than it is among white and African American populations, and it's very high levels of ownership among Asian populations. But there are differences in ownership levels by race and ethnicity. I think the two biggest categories where there are differences in ownership are age and income. More than 85% of people under the age of 30 have a smartphone. Less than 20% of people over the age of 65 have a smartphone currently. And so that's just something to keep in mind. And this is all based on a 5-year average of a survey the Census Bureau conducts every year. And so it's based on samples. There's about an 8% margin of error, depending on the part of the state. But generally speaking, that's how it breaks out. And then obviously with income, the higher income groups tend to have a higher smartphone penetration, lower income groups have a lower smartphone penetration. So when you start to talk about access, there's also a different kind of issue. Significant parts of California, particularly in the eastern part of the state and the southern part of the state, do not have good high-speed wireless connectivity, mobile connectivity. So you can forget about your 3G or your 4G for reporting purposes right now. Because, there's just not the infrastructure, very sparse populations. People are not a lot of people, and they're not clustered tightly together. So the infrastructure is just not there to support high-speed wireless reporting. So they just need a different option. Acceptability is another kind of thing you need to think about on this first one. Some people simply don't want to tell the government anything about where they were, what they were doing, how they were doing it, and that's fine. I'm actually probably related to most of those people. So that's all good. A lot of people, though, are less uncomfortable with that idea. This is a brave new world. Nobody's really done this before. So it's very difficult to go out and say, oh, well, elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in the world, people have done road charging and they like this idea, they don't like this idea. We know what people say they think they will like because we've asked those questions, but it hasn't really been put into practice yet. So we don't know what they really liked and really didn't like on a large scale. But there are some analogies in the financial sector. Every year the Federal Reserve does a survey of consumer finances, and they ask people questions about how they like to do their banking. And the last year for which the full data set's available, which is 2012, more than 80% of the United States population uses direct deposit. More than 50% uses pre-authorized debits. And that kind of falls very closely in line with a lot of these automated concepts that we're going to talk about, because you can imagine the full stream of data. You plug the gizmo in, whichever gizmo you choose. It reports the mileage that you've driven. You have a debit card or a credit card on file with pre-authorized debits from your account. It charges your account. It sends you a statement in the mail, and off you go. You never think about it, which is a little bit different from the workflow for the manual options. So I just wanted to throw those things out. Just keep in the back of your mind that there are some geographic disparities. There are some disparities in technology ownership. And there are also increasing acceptance of a lot of these electronic transactions, but it is by no means universal or universally accepted. I have lots more statistics and charts and graphs and maps, and I did not want to put you to sleep right after lunch, but if you would like to look at the data, please just let us know. Okay.
We're going to take a 2:30 break for coffee anyway, so it's all good.
That is good leadership. The second question that we're going to come back this afternoon and take action on really has to do with whether a GPS option should be offered for recording and reporting mileage for the pilot. I think that everybody's in agreement that we probably for the pilot do not envision reporting detailed location data outside the vehicle. The question is whether we want that data collected in the vehicle and used to simplify the process of reporting for the people who choose to go with that option. Now, if you, as a committee, decide you want that detailed information, that is reported out so that you can use it for research purposes, that is definitely your decision and in your purview. I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about that one because I think we've talked about it a lot and we'll come back to it later. And then the third question for this afternoon really has to do with whether an open or a closed system architecture should be adopted for this activity. There are advantages to both. I mean, one of the advantages to a closed architecture is you go buy a thing. Somebody who's an expert installs that thing for you. When it's done, it's done. You might periodically get upgrades to it, and off you go. The advantages to an open system is that there isn't a thing, and so it does encourage innovation and new actors coming into the market. It has the potential to lower costs over the long term, or have much lower costs over the long term. One thing that I wanted to bring up with respect to what you heard in conversations this morning with the Connected Vehicle Program, USDOT has adopted what is essentially an open system architecture, and they're developing open source software applications for the connected vehicle, for the DSRC-based safety applications. They are going with an open platform. There could be some possibilities for synergies between their system and what California develops if you were to go with that open system as well. So I did want to make you aware of that. So at this point, unless anybody has any questions, I'll turn it over to Matthew. He will run through a series of operational scenarios first, and then he'll give some details on the technologies that might be used as part of those operational scenarios. This afternoon, we're not going to ask you to make any decisions about which scenarios you like, which scenarios you don't like, but we want to come back next month and start to narrow down out of those many, many different options, which ones we're going to kind of continue to move forward with and focus on. Are there any questions? Yes.
This is probably a really stupid question, but does the pilot itself include the idea of it would be that you would pilot multiple automated options, or that we pick one?
As many as you choose.
Okay.
So you could have more than one manual, more than one automated, one of each, neither. I mean, just a manual. It's whatever the committee decides, keeping in mind that there is a schedule and a budget that we're going to have to adhere to. But definitely 4 or 5 different options is not unheard of.
Yeah, it's really up to the committee, and that's part of the whole reason going through this educational process. So sort of as Richard was alluding to today, if we could have 3 or 4 manual options or what have you, I'm all for that. Same thing with the technology side. The more, the merrier, obviously, noting that costs become an issue. But and the more it costs, the fewer we can pilot. The less it costs, the more we can pilot. Who knows? If it doesn't cost that much, we might have a pilot of 10,000 people. Hard to say.
And that's why we want. I know some people feel like we're kind of rushing you to make these decisions because you don't know all the technical details, you don't know all this stuff. But the earlier we can start to focus on, okay, we think these 5 things look like good ideas, or we think these 6 things look like good ideas, then we can really start to look at how much they'll cost. Come back to you with that information before this group's work is done.
And that's why I've said we can keep changing things as we go.
Right. And so then we can really narrow it down to that final list of 1 or 6 or whatever the committee decides.
Richard?
Mr. Chair, I guess I'm still a little bit unclear about what we're deciding and not deciding today.
We will decide on manual today. That was my commitment for number 13.
So I guess what I would like to see us come back, because I am hearing the word high level, and that's fine. But what I'd like to see us come back to next month is getting to the point where it would be clear from the user's perspective what this would look like, how it would work in their lives, so that we can get actual feedback on the different alternatives.
Isn't that what you were talking about for next month?
Right. So Matthew's going to run through again, kind of at I hate to say high level again, but what these different operational scenarios might look like. So what an odometer reading scenario might look like. And you take the month and think about those and send questions or make suggestions. And then we can come back in April and say, okay, these are what the workflows for these different things might look like from the user's perspective. So this is, the first of the year I have to do X, Y, Z in order to pay my road charge. Or at the beginning of the program, I have to sign up and get whatever device and then take care of paying my road charge. So we can provide from the user's perspective kind of what that might look like, but we don't know which of those to prepare until we kind of know. I mean, we're not going to devote a lot of effort into developing a bunch of automated scenarios if the decision today is don't do any. Okay.
And then as Matthew will get into item 11 on the agenda, that gets to the 7 operational concept options for road charging. And I think we'll just go ahead and, unless there's any other questions or comments for Shannon? Anybody from the public, any questions, comments from members of the audience? All right, hearing none, then let's move on to item 11 on our agenda, which are the operational concepts and enabling technology. Matthew?
Thank you very much, Chairman Daffer, and thanks, committee. I have the pleasure to discuss with you the operational concepts and enabling technologies for road charging that are potential for use in the pilot this afternoon. And I'm really thrilled to have that opportunity. And just to underscore what Shannon said originally, everything that we're doing is in support of you. So if you have any questions at all that you'd specifically like me to address in the further technology discussions, for example, next month, please make a note of those during my presentation and share it during the open discussion this afternoon. And I'm first going to talk about what we call operational concepts, which are the means of recording and reporting for a road usage charge. I won't go into technical details in the first slides, but I'll then move on to the enabling technologies, the underlying technologies that allow each of those operational concepts to be completed. Originally, the idea was that I would explain all of these concepts and technologies this month, and then you'd select those for the pilot next month. But based on the morning's discussion, you can make the selection, or you can make a selection of a number of manual options this month, and then make the automated discussion selections next month. So, again, during my presentation, please feel free to make notes about what additional information you'd like on any of these options. In any event, I will present the scenarios in such detail next month that everybody gets a sense of how it is that a user might sign up for each of these operational concepts and how the user might pay for each of these operational concepts on an ongoing basis. Today I'll present 7 operational concepts for road charging. As I just said, an operational concept is a method for recording and reporting road use. And the road concepts themselves vary by 2 different commodities. One is the basis of the charge, and the basis of the charge can either be time or distance, and the other is the reporting type, as you've already been discussing, whether it's a manual method or an automated method. So based on these 2 differentiating commodities, we came up with 7 concepts based on the road charging literature. The first is the manual time-based method, and that is a time permit. The second is the automated time-based method, which is engine runtime measurement. And I guess you can read off the other 7. I'll talk about each of these in succession after this. A time permit is basically a permit granting the motorist the ability to use the road for an unlimited amount, drive as long, no distance restriction, for a specific period of time, be that 1 day, 1 week, 1 year. This is used in several European countries today for highway usage. So it's not for all roadways, but for highway usage. And it's called, in English, the vignette system. And this is I have an example of a Slovak vignette. They're enforced with stickers, so you can put these stickers on your windshield. But there's no need for it to be a physical sticker. It can also be an electronic permit, which basically means you register your license plate number with the agency responsible for administering and enforcing the time permit, and then there's some enforcement method based on your license plate number. Just a couple of observations about this concept. If this concept is combined with other concepts, as I think the preceding discussion strongly suggests it will be, in the sense that there will be a package of concepts, at least in the pilot, and presumably also going forward into any potential system that may be implemented in California, the price of this option would probably need to be high or higher, because it does imply unlimited roadway usage. So if everybody were on this concept and it were limited, it could result in less revenue than under the gas tax. So this, because it doesn't limit roadway use, you'd need to think about what the price point would need to be. This would be an excellent option for charging out-of-state drivers, because it's very simple to sign up for. You could sign up for it with an app on your cell phone, for example. Just you've got your credit card in there, you're crossing in from Oregon or something, hit boom on your app, and your license plate is registered for 1 day or 1 week or whatever the allowed time periods are. So it would be very easy to sign up for. And actually, it's quite similar to a program that already exists in California, the non-resident daily commuter permit, which is for people who live and work, I think, within 50 miles. I can't remember the exact distance from the border, but commute daily into California. They're required to get this non-resident daily commuter permit. Now, it so happens that California's borders are relatively remote, most of them, from the other state borders, and so there's not a lot of participants in this program. But on the Nevada border, there are definitely some, and the other borders as well. And again, this could be a very appealing concept to those with significant privacy concerns, because it doesn't require even odometer numbers to be shared. The second concept is a bit unusual. This is the automated time-based concept. This is an engine runtime charge, which would be ultimately a per minute or per hour charge or per day charge for whenever the engine is actually running. This concept is not used anywhere now. And it would work by some sort of a sensor sensing when the engine is running and then reporting that automatically to a central system. You definitely need some alternative mechanism for dealing with any vehicles that don't cause vibration, such as electric vehicles, when they are running. So this alone would need some modification. This is really a kind of an unusual concept, and we included it for completeness. There are some clearly difficult policy challenges associated with this concept. It could be seen to encourage speeding, because the faster you get to a place, the less time your engine is running. It also could be a catalyst for a lot of community complaints about the roadway network, because if you don't have as many lanes as, say, your friend in another part of the state does, your friend can get from his or her home to the office more quickly, so that may also not be seen as a positive factor. And ultimately, it would force people to pay for time spent using the engines but not actually using the roadway, such as warming or cooling a car with an remote start or something like that. The third concept is a mileage permit, and this would be a permit, like the first concept is a time permit, but it would be to drive a certain number of miles. And this is used in New Zealand and has been for 40 years for their road usage charging, in New Zealand's language, program for diesel vehicles. This would be a fairly simple concept, but it does require an initial odometer reading, which the time permit wouldn't necessarily require. And in general, the heavy vehicles that use this, which actually are the majority of vehicles, there are not that many light diesel vehicles in New Zealand, have a hub odometer, a special odometer that is in the hub of one of their trailer axles to measure the mileage traveled. But for light vehicles, they just use the standard dashboard odometer. This permit could be checked at general traffic stops or vehicle inspections. Like the time permit, it could also be an electronic permit, and this also could be interesting to those with privacy concerns. Yes?
Is it on the trailer axle or the truck axle?
It may be actually on the truck axle, because I think I used to know this, but I cannot quite remember. I can address that in the April meeting.
Thanks.
And like the time permit, this could be interesting for those with significant privacy concerns. The fourth concept is in many ways a concept that people arrive at very quickly when they hear the idea of road charging, and want a manual option that is based on distance, which is the odometer charge that is a post-payment method. Essentially, there would be a reading of the odometer at the beginning of the year and a reading of the odometer at the end of the year, and you'd pay a charge based on the number of miles traveled, just the difference between those two numbers. This isn't used in any other locations today either, but remember, road charging is a very new concept, and I wouldn't read too much into that. That just is the way that we've been paying the gas tax, and much of the world has been paying a gas or fuel tax.
Is anybody looking at it?
I think it's certainly been looked at the other programs in the United States that are looking at road charging options. For example, I know it was looked at extensively, and is still being looked at extensively in Washington State, and there are a number of other pilots kind of bubbling up in other states that are definitely talking about this.
Follow up on that real quick. So there's nowhere is a manual odometer check, regardless of whether it's annual or a different time period, being used?
For payment for roadway usage, to my knowledge, that is correct. So this would be an odometer reading, again, as I discussed earlier, and it could be done either by a state representative or official, or it could be done by the road charge payer themselves. They would provide an odometer readings in the same way that people provide their own data, filling out their taxes at the end of the year, and there would be random audits or other enforcement methods used to maintain compliance. Now, there is one clear issue with this, which is if everybody switches to a post-payment method, there is a one-time or gradual cash flow issue, because the fuel tax is actually a prepaid tax. When you think about it, you pay for it when you fill up your tank before you've driven the miles based on that fuel. And it's also relatively continuous, because in most people's cases, you need to buy gas every week or two. Or with the hybrids, maybe less than that. But ultimately, it's a continuous payment. So there is this cash flow issue. And also, realistically, any set of odometer readings won't be precisely 12 months apart. I don't consider that to be a huge issue, because as long as you get an odometer reading once a year, one year you may pay for 11 months, the next year to 13 months. But it does change how the money will be distributed. And again, I'll get to this more in the technology section, but fraud and evasion would need to be addressed with any odometer-related charge.
There also would be a problem with out-of-state travel, right? I mean, people would complain that they were traveling. I wasn't even in the state at this time.
That's how one would do a rebate for out-of-state travel is definitely unclear with this particular issue. That is absolutely correct. The fifth concept is a prepay concept, also based on odometer readings. So to get over this issue of suddenly get everybody switching to paying at the end of the year, one idea would be to have everybody pay at the beginning of the year. And obviously you don't know exactly how many miles you're going to travel at the beginning of the year. So you would write in an estimate, and it might be based on a set of rules provided by the state, such as the first year everybody pays for 10,000 or 15,000 miles, and the year after that, then everybody would just pay the same number of miles as the previous year. Some set of rules. I'm not prescribing anything, but that would give you a sense of where to estimate your road usage for the next year. And then at the end of the year, you'd have a real odometer reading and either have read by an official your odometer, have your odometer read by an official, or report that yourself, and again with the same concerns about auditing and enforcement, and true up the difference. If you've overestimated the number of miles you drive, you might get a refund or a credit towards travel in a future year. If you've underestimated, you presumably would pay the difference. This is also not used anywhere, similar to the last concept, and I think, that's really all that needs to be said about this concept. It's just a tweak on the post-pay odometer charge. The sixth concept is automated reporting. We're now done with the manual methods, and these last two methods are both automated. But this method has no use of location data, and this could be used by any of the technologies that I'll discuss later that could support automated road charge payment. Essentially, any in-vehicle equipment, whether it is a device that fits into your vehicle's tester or OBD2 port, or a telematics system, would report the mileage traveled to an account manager. But no location measurement technology would be utilized or maybe even present. In the case of the plug-in devices, some of those devices do not have GPS or other similar technology included. So it would be just a number of miles driven, just like the odometer reading. This is an option available for Oregon road users starting in July in the Oregon Charge program.
Did you bring your show and tell thing?
Oh, yes, we did, in fact.
Good. Why don't you pass it around?
Jeff will pass around a,
take it out of the box.
A device.
Yeah, let's see him open it up. This is the show and tell part of the meeting where we're getting the undersecretary to. Let's see if he's qualified to do it now. What is that thing? Hold it up, everybody, Brian, so everybody sees it, and then we'll just pass it around. That's the device that goes into the OBDC port.
Oh, the OBD2 port.
OBD2 port on that car.
Simple instructions.
Oh, yeah. It's like one of those Apple unboxings. It's very exciting.
Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Again, similar to the odometer charge, there would not be the possibility of having automatic credits for traveling out of state or on private lands with this device either. That would be a similar issue to the one that it was with the odometer reading. Finally, we get to the idea that many people kind of associate, rightly or wrongly, with road charging, which is automated mileage reporting with general location information. And this also would use in-vehicle equipment. It's the same equipment, essentially, that I discussed before, but including some technology to measure location data, like a GPS chip. But it would report general location. And by general location, we basically mean the miles traveled within the state of California on public roads. Those could all be lumped together into one single bucket and added up, and then miles traveled in other states or on private lands could be excluded from that. And there's no need with this method to report any more location data than that. Just mileage on public roads and mileage essentially not on public roads or out of state. This is used in the New Zealand electronic road charging program. They don't have out of state, but they do very much have private roads. And it's also available in Oregon as well. Like the other device, the motorist installs the device or activates the telematics app that would be needed to run this, and an account manager invoices the motorist periodically.
I'm sorry, real quick question.
Sure.
So you mentioned the telematics. So all of these automated ones
Yes.
involve the automatic transmission of information.
Correct.
None of them would require pulling that out of the car and having to turn it in. Okay.
There is a concept that would use that. That is a possibility, and there's actually a California startup called True Mileage that does offer that as a possibility for usage-based insurance. So that could be part of the solution. That's ultimately up to the committee to make a decision. Yeah.
I guess just to follow on that, there's other than sort of the prepay, postpay, and cash flow issue, there's no particular reason why it would need to be why the data transmissions would need to be contemporaneous,
No,
right?
there is
you
not.
could just do it once. It could be programmed to do it once a month, or quarterly, or something like that.
Absolutely correct. In fact, cost of communications could be a substantial operating cost of the program, so you probably wouldn't want to do it too often.
Right.
Another
Yes.
follow-up on that. The devices don't necessarily have their own communication capability. They're working through other communication capability in the car. Is that correct?
Well, again, I'm going to talk about technology later, but
Yeah, okay.
to answer that, the answer is there are both models. There are definitely both models. They're the kind that they all have some form of communication capability, so they can transmit it to your cell phone can transmit it on, or many of them do have embedded cellular modems, so they can transmit the information themselves. Both of those models of device exist.
And are there any models in use now that don't connect to your cell phone, don't have their own communication, but do go through the car's communication?
No, not that I am aware of. The idea certainly exists to run it directly on the telematics platform, but you don't need an external device for that. So those are just apps running in the telematics system that shoot it off using the telematics system. I don't think there are any you'd plug in something and you wouldn't need an external device.
And some of you may remember at the last meeting, I think I shared with you the fact that one possibility exists that some folks may not even need to get a smog check anymore in their vehicle once this telematics platform continues to evolve, as Ishwar was talking about. Car measures the smog output of a vehicle, sends the data quarterly. In fact, the executive director of the CTC and I chatted with Mary Nichols, who chairs the California Air Resources Board, and just as they developed this platform that you can plug that thing into the car now, which is used nationwide, the possibility exists as well of using onboard vehicle telematics to take data that would otherwise not be used, but to take that data, say for smog check purposes, transmit the emission data to a central point, and therefore you would never have to go in and get your vehicle smog checked if, in fact, it passed muster. The same is true with adding a layer of geographic data for just public roads. So whenever the vehicle, and I know Lee and I have had this conversation, whenever the vehicle is driving on a public road that is paid for by taxpayers, it will track that mileage and record it. You drive on a ranch road, a private road, you drive out of state, it stops recording. The only data that would get transmitted are just the miles driven, not time, not place. And again, this gets back onto what Ishwar was talking about earlier today, to where eventually we could see the same technology be employed for toll lanes, bridges, and other forms, to where you know that there is a charge, again, depending on time and place, but all that gets sent is the data, not time, not place, preserving the privacy issues, which are so critically important. So as we get more into this, these are kind of things that, again, as part of this educational process and this open forum type of dialogue, you'll have that as part of our recommendations going forward. So, okay.
Yes.
And please, as I've said, you got a comment, question, just interrupt, because that's the way we work best here.
Okay, thanks. I think I've reached the end of my discussion of the operational concepts, and I'll move on to the discussion of the technologies that enable those concepts. We've already gotten into some of those discussions now, but we'll revisit them, and you may have more questions.
Actually, I guess I do have one question that before you get into that, because this. So we're looking at, I think, we're looking at measuring time or distance, but I'm not. Where does the weight of the vehicle fit in? Because it's my understanding that that actually is a significant variable in terms of measuring wear and tear on the road system, and maintenance is not the only goal in this. I mean, we've also got congestion, pollution sort of issues and revenue issues. But to the extent that we are talking about trying to have some kind of equity around actual road damage, it seems like weight would seem to be an important variable that's not yet fully integrated.
I mean, the discussions that I've heard about weight usually reflect possibly adjusting the per mile rate based on the weight of the vehicle. You wouldn't necessarily need to report the weight in real time to do that. So it wouldn't necessarily impact which of these technologies you chose. In the sense of commercial vehicles, their weight actually can change, so that's a different discussion about commercial vehicles. But for light vehicles, and that is a policy question, should weight be considered? I'm not going to in any way issue a judgment on that. But, yeah.
Could I jump in on that point?
Sure.
I think that the weight issue has been brought up a number of times before. And, intuitively, the heavier the vehicle would have greater damage, one would think, and should maybe pay a different amount for road maintenance. The reality is that vehicles of any weight under about 10,000 pounds don't make any damage to the road, essentially. And so that's really a commercial truck only issue. And it's not my Prius versus somebody else's Hummer. There's no difference between the two. So I just want to get that really straight.
But I will just say, I think that, again, something we should keep in mind, I tend to lean on the side of, hey, you drive a more fuel-efficient vehicle or a smaller vehicle, maybe there ought to be breaks for those folks because, again, we need to think about incentivizing. Now, is that part of our task under the legislation? No. But is that something that we can recommend as part of our report? Absolutely. You have that ability.
Great. Okay. So I'll proceed by talking about the technologies that support each of these operational concepts. The first three, the time permit, the engine runtime, and the mileage permit, have essentially unique technologies for each one of them. Both of the odometer charges essentially have odometer technology. And then the two automated concepts have four different technologies that each of which can support each of those automated concepts. So I'll talk about each four of those, and remember, those can be with or without location data. And I should say, Concept 7, many of these devices have the ability to shut off the transmission of location data, or even though you're not transmission, but even recording of location data. Even when you have a GPS chip, you can press a button and say you're not even going to have the device look at that information, and that would add another layer of anonymity that a user could choose. Before I talk about the technologies in detail, I do want to share with everyone on the committee the evaluation criteria that SB 1077 specifically spells out for each of the technologies. I also want to say that these aren't necessarily all-inclusive. They don't necessarily represent everything that needs to be considered in line of these technologies, but these are the ones that 1077 spells out. The first is availability, and availability has a couple of different meanings, so I listed two possible meanings of availability, both of which are relevant. One is acquisition. Is the technology, can you get it on the market? Is it possible to make it available to everyone in California? And the other is availability in the IT sense of the word. How much uptime does it have, or is this subject to not being available because of some technology issues? The second is adaptability, and this has two very distinct and both very important meanings with respect to these technologies. One is it's suitable for all vehicles on the road in California. Just as an example, the OBD2 port, which was mandated by ARB, it started in 94, but wasn't true of all vehicles, all new vehicles, until 1996. So there's a large body of vehicles 20 years and older that do not have OBD2 port technology. So that suitability for all vehicles is one big component of adaptability, and another is changeability. Is this technology static once you choose it? Is it inflexible, or can it be adapted for other uses, other needs, other applications in the future? The third criterion from SB 1077 is reliability. Is the device prone to failure, or on the flip side, is it a very reliable device that does not have many failures? Data security is an issue that everybody is talking about, and this is a vital one. So clearly, the legislators wanted that to be very prominent in the considerations about these technologies. Beyond that, the clear big privacy concern of the ability to protect personally identifiable information. Then we get into the ease of use, ease of recording and reporting. I read that as being the ease of use for the motorist of the particular technologies. Then the ease of administration for the state, for the agencies that would be administering it. And the next one is enforceability, or really how compliance can be maintained with each of these methods or technologies. The ease of re-identifying location data. So I guess the writers of SB 1077 were imagining that some form of location data would be stored. If it were stored, how could that be reassociated with a specific location with a specific individual? And alternatively, you could just not store it. And then increased privacy concerns when the data is used for other technologies. In the briefing book that everyone on the TAC received, we included a proposed technology evaluation sheet. And this is simply a listing of the technologies across the top and then the criterion in the left-hand column. And we left in the next to last column a place for other issues, because these criterion do not capture things like the fact that the time permit does not really in any way measure the distance traveled on the roadway, and that is a big concern, for better or worse, about the time permit. So just to provide the opportunity to judge other potential issues about this. And then we left a place for overall rating. This is only a proposal. Again, at the April meeting, you'll be asked to make selections of the technologies and concepts to continue with. But as has been said several times, through the September meeting, all of these decisions can be revisited. So how the committee chooses to use this proposed evaluation sheet is entirely up to the committee. We just wanted to make that available. The first technology I'll talk about is generic in the sense that it applies to all of the concepts. It is a road charge database that would be used to store the current operational concept that every individual registered for the program in California had chosen. So in the idea of user choice, it's very possible that any final program would include multiple or many multiple, or perhaps almost all of the concepts chosen, or maybe just 3 or 4. In any event, it would be important for the state to know which of these concepts any given vehicle, I shouldn't say motorist, but really any given vehicle is registered for. Generally, you'd think that each vehicle would be required to be registered for one valid concept at all times. And this database would store, in addition to which concept, perhaps some specific details associated with that concept. So if it were an odometer charge, you could have the most recent 1 or 2 or 3 odometer readings of that vehicle stored in this database. And this would be used for administration and enforcement. So this technology underlies all the other technologies I'll talk about today. For the time permit, the technology is really either a window sticker or some form of automated enforcement like an automatic license plate reading camera that I'm showing down there in the corner. And just to reiterate a few of the things that I said from before about the time permit, it doesn't measure usage in the sense of distance. It defines a block of time in which drivers can drive an unlimited number of miles. And the pricing may need to be higher than on others. And by higher, not necessarily in a per mile sense, but just in order that the road there not be too much travel. If you can drive an unlimited amount for a certain number of dollars, then suddenly people might abuse that. You paid your X number of dollars, and then you can drive unlimitedly. So there may need to be some consideration given to pricing on the time permit. The engine runtime measurement would be based to a large extent on a sensor that would sense when the engine was operating, and that's a vibration sensor. But it would need to be coupled with a device that then could collect that information, verify that it is on the vehicle, connected to the vehicle, and hasn't been pulled off of it, and then potentially to transmit it in some sort of an automated way to the central system. Again, these devices don't really exist now, but could be developed. The third technology is a mileage permit, and the mileage permit like the first time permit, just needs either a sticker or some form of an electronic display, some form of an electronic registration. These devices are typically, this is typically a prepay method, so you pay for the miles before you drive them. But the challenge associated with this one and with both of the odometer methods, which I'll talk about next, is the potential for odometer fraud. So I'll touch on that briefly here. Digital odometers, which are virtually universal in vehicles now and have been for, I would say, almost 20 years, are actually just as subject to odometer fraud as manual odometers were to being rolled back physically. And this is done with equipment that interfaces with the vehicle electronics. And unfortunately, this equipment can be purchased on the Internet. Hopefully not at any reputable retailers, but I do know this is available. There was even just recently a big lawsuit by the Department of Justice against some fraudulent used vehicle sellers who were doing just this. They just buy these devices, plug them in, and 50,000 miles disappears off of the odometer instantly. I should say that the motivation to commit odometer fraud would ultimately be quite low if in the final concept some sort of fuel tax remains in place. And I make no judgment about that in particular, but if a fuel tax remains in place, then ultimately there would be a need to reconcile between fuel tax and road charging payments. So if the fuel tax is still there, the amount of you would be saving by committing such fraud, at least at the early stage of a program, would be pretty low. So with that, I'll move on to the odometer charge. And in the odometer charge, both the prepay and the postpay concepts, really the only technology needed is the road charging database. You just need to store the odometer reading at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year, and you could just have a continuous one odometer reading per year, or maybe you need to do it more frequently than that, but that would be the simplest form, presumably, just once a year. The same concerns about odometer fraud apply to the odometer charge concept as well, obviously. Now we're getting into the 4 automated technologies for the 2 automated concepts. The first are these usage-based insurance devices. At least that's what I'm calling them, although some of them don't support usage-based insurance. Some of them support other car applications, telematics, eco-driving, young driver teaching, and so I'll call them all usage-based insurance devices because most of them are provided and support usage-based insurance. They exist both with and without any sort of location-determining technology like GPS. They usually fit into the vehicle's tester or OBD2 port, which was, as I said, mandated by ARB back in the early 90s and became filtered in starting in 94 and became universal in 96. And they use
So can you just clarify that again? So that was something that, didn't California start that?
California
Give me a little bit of background
initiated
so everybody
that,
gets that as well.
and it became virtually a worldwide standard. It's a little bit different in other countries, but California did it first. The EPA, U.S. EPA, jumped on it a year after ARB did and made it nationwide in the U.S.
You keep saying that acronym.
The Air Resources Board.
Thank you. Just making sure everybody
California
knows. There
Air
are
Resources
people
Board.
watching this meeting in cyberspace that may not know the geekdom that you profess. Yeah. There you go. People at this table, there you go.
Thank you very much for that clarification. That is true. And actually, in the automotive industry, when I worked there, I called it CARB because it's the California Air Resources Board. Maybe that's not viewed as like
That's
good
what we
for
call
your
it.
waistline. Oh, you call it CARB.
We call
okay.
it CARB. California Air Resources.
But they call themselves ARB, don't they? At least I've seen that. Well, ARB is CARB.
ARB. Yeah.
And I just see a bad joke about a low-carb diet coming in, which I don't want to get into. These devices cost about $50 right now. I think you can assume economies of scale, usage-based insurance is certainly growing. The price could drop beyond that. And beyond that, actually, the insurance companies subsidize the cost of this device to their customers who choose to have it. So the customers don't usually pay anything for the device itself. This device, like all of the automated concepts, could be supported potentially by something we're calling commercial account managers. And this would be a private entity that would provide customer account management for those people who chose to use these devices. And that would potentially offload some of the administrative duties of the state to administering these devices. And I did want to point out that there are several innovative California companies that make or manage these devices. Metromile and True Mileage and Automatic, I think all of these are Bay Area startups, and they're all manufacturing these usage-based or using these usage-based insurance devices. The next technology is one everybody's familiar with, and Shannon remarked on in her introductory remarks, the smartphone, which is a very universal device and could be used potentially for road charging measurement. However, it's very important to know that you can't just put an app on your phone and put it in your pocket and go into a vehicle. The phone needs some way of being anchored to the vehicle to know that it is actually in the vehicle at all times. Otherwise, fraud would be rampant. You just not include your phone, or even unintentional evasion like your phone is out of battery. So just an app on the phone doesn't cut it. The way that people in industry have talked about doing this with smartphones is that the phone would be coupled to the vehicle with Bluetooth at all times while it is recording mileage traveled and transmitting mileage traveled. And in order to make up for miles that a driver might have to drive when the phone battery is dead or the phone got stolen or lost, the companies that are talking about this solution are using a picture of the odometer taken by the phone while the phone is connected to the vehicle via Bluetooth, and potentially requiring the drivers to submit those visual images at some sort of frequency, whether it's once a year or every 6 months. I'm not certain. But ultimately, that visual image of the odometer being sort of the very basis to make sure no miles are missed with this particular operational concept. And this concept could also be supported by commercial account managers. The next technology is telematics. We had an entire presentation on that this morning. I don't want to repeat any of that presentation. I think everybody here understands now that telematics are computer systems embedded in the vehicle that have some way of speaking to the outside world through a computer data connection. And obviously, road charging could just be another app that runs on a telematics platform. It should be pointed out that all automakers have their own unique telematics systems. There's no, I mean, in the smartphone world, it's pretty easy. Android and iOS make up a very large percentage of smartphone platforms. There's also Windows and others, but multiply, you get 90 or 95% with just those two platforms. However, all the automakers have their own unique telematics systems. Thus, you potentially need to have a road charge app developed for each one, but that is not a huge burden. I just want to point out that they're all unique. And similar to the others, this could also be supported by commercial account managers. The final category, sort of a catch-all, other devices that could measure vehicle location and use that to report mileage. The primary category of devices in this category, the primary type of devices in this category, are those used for the heavy vehicle tolling programs in Europe and elsewhere, and those that might be used in the road usage charging program in New Zealand. Those two devices are used on the German truck tolling program, and they do include GPS, and they mount in commercial vehicles. They're relatively large and not particularly beautiful, but such devices really would be very well suited potentially were commercial vehicles to be included in a California road charging program. But I don't see them as especially well suited for light vehicles. And that concludes the first presentation I'm going to give. So the second one is on architecture. I don't need to go in. Chairman Daffer, you can decide do we want to have open conversation now or go on.
It's the will of the committee, or we can just start moving right in. Matt can go into the architecture. Marty?
I'd like to ask for a little more on fraud and evasion. With respect to odometers, because we have a long history and there have been people prosecuted and jailed and all that, it's sort of obvious. But it may also be quite possible that with the motivation of a mileage-based program, creative people will find other approaches to fraud and evasion. How much can you tell us from the literature or the research or the experience in other countries, does that enter into the serious, how serious is that issue in us making a choice?
Professor Wax, I think that's an excellent question. I think a lot of other places have been reluctant to explore odometers because of this potential, and so I think a lot of it is still unknown. I do know that in other places where this has been discussed, the idea of auditing specific individuals, asking them sort of where do you live, where do you work, and kind of coming at them in the way that you might audit a person's taxes if there is something potentially questionable about those taxes. That is the way, the means of enforcement that has most frequently been discussed. Individual sets of questions, because to my understanding of the technology, the manipulation of the odometer does not necessarily leave any sort of an odometer, any sort of an electronic trace. The vehicle electronics does not necessarily record a transaction record of the manipulation. So it's about auditing the individuals and then the threat that other individuals may feel. And also, as I mentioned in that one slide, the marginal benefit from doing it might not be huge. I mean, we are talking a couple $100 potentially. If you set your miles to zero, people probably aren't going to believe you. But so either the lack of large motivation to commit a substantial fraud and coupled with the threat of maybe random audits or targeted audits, or both.
Okay. Any other
But-
questions as we go into architecture?
Just one quick question, which
Go
is,
ahead.
I thought that the Professor Wax was asking about the fraud risk of the non-odometer systems. Weren't you?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Of the non-odometer ones. Oh, sorry. Then I misunderstood your question.
More familiar
Yes.
with odometer fraud, but I was asking whether the other
Oh, sorry.
options have been researched or whether,
Well, I can answer about the
by
automated options.
evading, not selecting an odometer-based method because of fraud doesn't mean we avoid fraud.
Completely
it increases
agreed.
the incentive
Sure.
to adopt fraud in other
Then
methods.
I'll do my best to go through the other options. The time permit, really there is no way of defrauding it because you have unlimited usage, so that one falls out. Mileage permit and the two odometer ones kind of fall under that odometer category. The engine runtime is a bit unusual. There's nothing really I can say about that one. The two automated options, in the case of a usage-based insurance device, that device can tell when it has been removed from a vehicle and replaced in the vehicle. In the Oregon program, the number of plugs and unplugs is sent along with the mileage information. And any other unusual events that like if it is a location-based device, if the GPS became unavailable for a long period of time, other weird electronic events, all that data is stored and then sent. Now, I should point out that one unplug is not necessarily a sign of fraud. In fact, you expect those to be unplugged when a person drives in and has a smog check or drives to a mechanic and has their vehicle diagnosed for a problem. They read out all of the error flags. And so one or two occasional separations of the device are perfectly normal. So they have to develop a set of rules, and I don't know where they are in that, for what type of fraud might occur based on the separation of the devices. For the smartphone option, I think there is some ultimate reliance on the odometer, as I implied there. So I think the issue there goes back to the odometer issues. Potential for fraud with Bluetooth seems relatively low to me. I don't want to say it's completely impossible. The cars each have their own unique Bluetooth addresses, so that keeps the potential fairly low when the device is in the vehicle. But ultimately, if you're relying on an odometer image, that goes back to the odometer charge. For telematics, if the app itself is written correctly, I personally don't see any potential for fraud, but that's something that needs to be researched when an actual telematics app for road charging is in place. So if that were in a California pilot, that would be a fantastic opportunity to do some real research about the security of that app and whether there were any that gets into the security of the car's system in general, in fact. And am I missing any? Well, the heavy truck system. Germany really has very, very low fraud, if any fraud, on their Autobahn system. So I think that one is actually fairly secure, but it's not one that I necessarily think is appropriate for light vehicles.
I think the common theme of what you're saying is that with any technical solution, there is an incentive for people to figure out a way to defraud it.
Agreed.
So, which I think points to, all else being equal, and the other points we made about analog solutions perhaps being desirable in certain contexts. It's like, as you say, it's really hard. You can't fake time, right?
Correct.
So, even though there may not necessarily be, for example, with the insurance device, it can measure when it's been unplugged and sort of irregularities. I think that if this were if and when that became mandated on a large scale, you would see a lot of people trying to figure out a way around that.
Agreed. I think it does point to the importance of looking at fraud issues in a pilot potentially itself.
Okay, let's...
One quick question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Chair Dunn.
Matthew, I may have missed it, but in the discussion that you did on engine runtime as an option, are there any good things about this?
Commissioner Dunn, that's a very good question. I included it because in this framework for the concepts, there were manual and automated and time-based and distance-based, so it was something to be included from there. Some people have seen it as a proxy for congestion charging, which is not a topic this committee is tasked with addressing. So if you are motivated to not spend a lot of extra time on the road, you would choose to travel in times that you would that there's not a lot of congestion, because you could pay less by doing that. That's one of the reasons you might want to have these engine runtime charges.
Because the framework in which I'm asking my question is in the panoply of telematics options.
Yes.
I look at this one and say, are you really giving us an option?
I mean, it's something
and that's for the committee to decide. But in my mind, I just didn't see that it doesn't never been implemented, and it has a lot of negatives. And thank you for the benefits that are not on the page. Okay, just wanted to make sure that there was sort of a reality check. Thanks.
Eric, did you have a comment?
On the audits, who and what governing body or agency is going to be responsible for doing the audits for essentially millions of pieces of equipment?
I'll defer that to Susan. There's no, I can't issue any statement.
As part of this process, we would be bringing in, as we talk about enforcement, we have, Caltrans is actually bringing together a group of state agency, state departments to talk a little bit about that. I suspect we'll be bringing forward at a future meeting some folks to speak to that as to how we would do that from a state agency standpoint.
And then one more question. Out-of-state vehicles coming in, not your, just a family taking a vacation into California from Oregon, but trucks coming in, fleets of trucks coming in. How would that work? What option or system seems to look like the most feasible?
In general, I think the ability to sign up for a road charge in the same way that California residents sign up for a road charge could be made available to individuals in all states, be they truck or light vehicle. If you're frequently traveling in California, you may want to register your vehicle in the same way and have the same sorts of devices. If you don't, if you're just a one-time visitor, then that may be too much of a hassle. So things like the time permit, things like the mileage permit may be the better ways of handling them. Certainly, mileage permits are used for trucks in New Zealand, and again, the time permit is something, even the mileage permit potentially, that could be signed up for on your cell phone, on your telematics platform just once. You just download the app, put in your credit card number, your license plate number, and the dates that you want the time permit to be valid, and boom, you're done. Or you do it on the web the night before, or something like that. Or you can make a touch-tone phone. There's a lot of different and I can talk about those in the presentation I give next month on the actual user experience associated with these concepts.
Okay, why don't we, first, before we jump to the next item, are there any members of the audience, questions, comments, anything? All right, hearing none, then why don't we go ahead and go into the architecture piece, and then concluding that presentation in a Q&A, we'll take a 10-minute coffee break, and then we'll reconvene for our action items. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chairman Daffer. The real purpose, or the main purpose of this presentation is to give the TAC an introduction to the high-level architecture, and specifically to allow the TAC the background to select the closed or consider the open system for the architecture of a potential pilot in California. To that end, a closed system for road charging would be a self-contained system, one in which one single organization or company that would be selected by the state would provide all the user hardware and interfaces. Another organization, the state itself, whatever agency or group of agencies is tasked with overseeing a road charge, would manage or would oversee it, and also that organization would manage user accounts and remit the charges to the state. The private organization potentially would. A closed system, it's frequently used in toll collection and transit fare cards, the smart cards that are used for payment, like the Clipper card in the Bay Area. And the advantages of a closed system are that it is easier to start than an open system. You don't have to predefine any standards. You issue a single procurement to get one vendor. And it doesn't really require an especially large market to start because the profit made by this one company is paid for directly by the state and doesn't necessarily come from the users themselves. So it can be started for a smaller market. However, there are some negative potential consequences. It can lead to vendor lock-in, meaning that vendor contains all of the information to deal with the clients, and that vendor may use the fact that it's kind of locked into this contract to make prices fairly high for the state. So it's not necessarily the most economically efficient. And also, it doesn't necessarily encourage innovation. In an open system, you have multiple companies competing with one another, and I'll get on to that in a second. But also, there's a lot of more motivation for the companies involved to innovate.
Matthew?
Yes, certainly.
I'm having trouble understanding why this is a threshold question for this committee in designing a pilot project. We're not going to have a large market, right?
For the pilot project, the question is really, will the pilot project simulate an open system, or will it more simulate a closed system? And
so what does that look like? What's the difference in the pilot?
In a pilot, I think for a closed system, you would have one single vendor, one single company that would provide all of the methods that are chosen by the TAC, whereas with an open system, you would need to define, and I'll get into that in the slide on open systems, a standard by which all the potential participants would create their services, and then you'd have at least two, but potentially more. You would open it up to multiple vendors. And the reason this would sort of set a precedent that the state may choose to follow in any future potential road charging legislation. If an open system were included, it was something that the legislature could see was demonstrated and had worked in a pilot. If it hadn't been, there might be some reluctance to do so by the state legislature. So it's to sort of have that potential. If we set a set of standards that may not be the final set of standards, but one that could be potentially used for multiple companies to interact. Now, can we simulate that in the pilot? Does that answer your question?
Well, yes, so far.
Okay.
Maybe I can ask Norma. Given what you said earlier about accelerating the rollout, is there time to develop the whole set of standards that would be needed for an open system in the pilot?
The plan is to do that, yes. It's going to be challenging, certainly, but you know, from my preference, as not speaking for the administration or anybody, from the department, but an open system makes more sense. And I'd like to give the legislature and the policymakers, the broadest recommendations, and having tested this. So that's
okay. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. The closed system can indeed support both manual and automated methods, so we're not eliminating any methods by choosing a closed or system. And really, the architecture is just one line. There is one vendor that would report to the state under a closed system. In contrast, an open system for road charging would allow multiple organizations, multiple companies to participate at all levels of the program. Any qualified company could be what we're calling an account manager, manage user accounts, and then any other qualified company could provide the mileage reporting devices, or these devices that would be used like usage-based insurance devices, or the apps that would run on telematics platforms. So companies would be free to enter the market anytime, as long as their equipment or services meets the standards that are set by the state. This, again, the important thing here is that the devices and the account managers conform to a common set of standards, both for hardware and services. It does require more effort to start than a closed system, and it does require a minimum market size because, again, the anticipation would be that the account managers would potentially try to sell additional value-added services to their clients, such as usage-based insurance. This could just be an add-on to usage-based insurance, or potentially they could facilitate combining all of their tolling accounts using this device. these are potential value-added services. There are a bunch more, but these companies would charge a fee for these value-added services. Oh, and also the device would support road charging. Similar to the other closed system, it also supports manual and automated methods. And then at a very high level, the system architecture is a mileage reporting device that would talk to the account manager, which then would talk to some account management oversight entity, which would be a state agency or collection of agencies. And I can see that Lee is about to hit his talk button. So,
Yeah, I have a question which may seem slightly tangential, but this is you've mentioned usage-based insurance a few times, and again, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. But I remember a few years ago when we were commenting on a DOI proposal relating to boxes, basically, versus odometers and one of the things I sort of learned was that under Prop 103 in California, the insurers can only base premiums on like three things, and they did not include a lot of things that people include in other states. And so, I ended up meeting with the guys from Progressive, and they said, yeah, we don't really care about this stuff in California because, A, we can't do anything with it, and B, we find, frankly, that our traditional algorithms have worked very, very well from a premium assessment perspective. So while I appreciate that some of those companies making those boxes are in California, I'm not sure would they really have
your analysis sounds very valid, that given the limited statistics upon which to base premiums, the market for usage-based insurance in California itself may be very limited. I don't think that excludes using such devices for a road charging program, but that may not be a valid value-added service. They may have to choose from the young driving, the eco-driving, and the toll unification types of applications that I was discussing. No.
Quick question. With a variety of options, and I'm all for a lot of options.
Sure.
But how then does the state know that every car has picked an option? Obviously, there'll be some process for that. And then how do we deal with unregistered cars that now do pay the gas tax unless they're an unregistered electric car, which are probably few?
Excellent question. This body, do I not have a... Yes, I do. This body, the Account Management Oversight Body, which I will talk about very briefly at the end of this presentation, will be a state entity, either within one of the existing agencies or a newly formed. I make no judgment about that. But it would be tasked with using the road charge database to verify that every vehicle that is in the state and registered and liable for the road charge, because it could be, depending on the phase-in of the road charge, that there is a short or potentially long period of time in which some vehicles are subject to it and other vehicles are not. So it would use this road charging database to verify that every vehicle is actually registered for one device or another. And with each of the concepts, there would be some linkage back to the road charge database. And I can talk about that a bit in my presentation next month, what that linkage would be. In the case of a mileage permit or a time permit, it may simply be the users filling out that card or filling out that online form or typing in an app, and that makes its way to the database to verify that is in there. So I think that was the first part of your question, and you asked a second part, and I've forgotten it.
It was about unregistered cars, and I suspect there are a lot more unregistered cars in the state than there are electric cars at the moment.
For those vehicles that are in the state and are unregistered, I think whatever approaches towards unregistered vehicles are currently being done will be continued. I don't think that a road charge would necessarily have a...
Understood. I'm not saying that this is going to solve that problem. It's
sure.
It's an issue that
it is an important issue, and I appreciate that. Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about a phase-in at the last meeting. What I'm not clear about is if you're buying gas, you're paying a gas sales tax, whether you're in that program or the
correct
road charge program. How do you see that working?
I see that the possibility would be that users of the road charge who are also buying gas upon which taxes are being paid as well, assuming the final choice is that the road charge would replace the gas tax, would get some sort of a refund or credit based on the fuel tax paid. And there are a number of different ways of measuring that credit, whether it's, in the case of the automatic devices, there would be a way of doing that automatically. In the case of manual devices, it would be more likely to be a manual fuel tax refund, yeah. And I'll go ahead and move on, and I'm just going to talk about each of these three components, and that's really the end of my presentation. The mileage reporting block includes two separate components. One, the device itself that resides in the vehicle, which may be what I've been calling usage-based insurance device, but maybe given that that's not such an application in California, I could think of a different OBD2 dongle could be called. I don't like the word dongle, but and
well, it's the same reason we outlawed in this committee the word ruck. We won't use dongle as well.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I call it, thingy, yeah. Gizmo. How about Gizmo? And another system that would either be in the vehicle or external to the vehicle that would translate the information generated by the in-vehicle device and into a standardized communications format. So, for example, these usage-based insurance companies, often the data that is transmitted by the devices themselves is very compressed in a very unique proprietary format, and then in a somewhere in a server farm somewhere, it can get translated into a common format that would be one of those open standards that is used to define the open system. And having this data collection system outside of the vehicle would indeed allow the existing technology to be used in an open system, and essentially, yeah, just as I described, that would allow that technology to be used and translated into any sort of an open standard that would be defined in California. Account management is sort of the big block here. This is the block where the company that would take in the mileage data, update user accounts based on that data, invoice the customers, receive payment from the customers, provide any sort of customer service if there are concerns about their accounts, send any money that was collected for road charging on to the state, and report any data from the road charge program to the state for the purposes of accounting. This could be run by a private commercial account manager, and these account managers, as I mentioned, could provide some sorts of value-added services to their customers. This could reduce the cost to the state, and it could also reduce risk to the state of managing multiple different types of electronics in a complex system. However, it also might be desirable for the state to run an account manager itself, either in addition to or instead of private account managers. And there's no decision made on that yet, and no need to make a decision on that. And finally, the account management oversight body that I mentioned earlier is a state body that would verify that all vehicles are registered all vehicles subject to the road charging program are registered in it, and verify that the account managers have paid the correct amount of money for those vehicles on a monthly or quarterly basis, and also would do things like certifying, recertifying, and auditing those account managers to make sure that they are performing correctly. And that's really the end of my presentation. So we've had a lot of conversation throughout my presentation, but this is another opportunity to talk.
Okay, so if there are any, I know we've had an interactive discussion as we go. Any additional questions or comments from the committee? How about members of the public that are here? All right, again, this was an informational item. Why don't we take a 13-minute coffee break. We'll go to 2:40 p.m. and we will reconvene right at 2:40 on the dot, and we'll get into item 13, which is the beginning of our action items for today. Thank you.
Thanks.